So guys, what should we talk about today? What do you think?
I thought we were talking about parliamentary procedure.
Oh, yeah. So,
like, I got my Robert's Rules of Order.
Okay, so we're going to follow Robert's Rules of Order during this conversation?
I was thinking we could just read Robert's Rules of Order out loud to each other.
Okay. Have you guys ever used Robert's Rules of Order?
I have. I was in student Congress.
Oh. I think I used it once or twice, but I don't remember it very well.
Is student Congress as ideologically polarized as real Congress?
Maybe we should talk about Reince Priebus. I mean,
Ugh.
no.
He got fired.
Yeah, you're right. I don't really give two shits about Reince Priebus.
Okay, so I think there is one thing to say about Reince Priebus.
What is that?
He was bad, right?
He was just very ineffective. I don't think he was morally bad. Do you?
I think he might have been morally bad.
He was definitely extremely ineffective, and I think we are going to miss his commitment to incompetence. If the new guy, General Kelley, is actually able to help move the Trump agenda forward, because lest we forget, the Trump agenda is, on the whole, pretty terrible. And so having Reince there, keeping anything from ever happening, that was good.
There are a lot of military folks in the White House now, huh?
So my theory is that, and I've told you guys this on the Slack, but I think Trump thinks there's going to be a coup, and so he's trying to get the generals on his side, you know?
He's trying to get his generals.
He's trying to get his generals in the right positions so that, you know, there's not a coup. Or that if there is a coup, he, like, you know, is ready for it. I wouldn't put him past faking a coup. Like, I think, like, that's like because Erdogan basically did that, right? The president of Turkey. He basically, it seems clear now that he faked a coup to then, like, sort of consolidate his own power.
Wasn't it Gulen?
You know, a year ago, this would be like an outlandish conspiracy theory.
Yeah, totally. A year ago, like, all the stuff that I was saying would just be like, let's just say it would not be mainstream acceptable. Like, I probably couldn't say some of these things out loud. Mm-hmm. But now I can. Just like Donald Trump can say some of the things he says out loud.
Now it's just depressing.
But, you know, we didn't call you, our listeners, to our show to depress you excessively. Or did we?
That's just a bonus.
Yeah. So, AJ, do you want to talk about parliamentary procedure, dude? I mean, you know, I
don't. Why are we calling? What is going on?
What do you mean?
You said you wanted to talk about parliamentary procedure, dude.
Yeah.
No, Tom,
in the Slack,
no.
You said that I want to read Robert's Rules of Order out loud to each other.
Yeah.
Like, that's a verbatim quote.
Yeah. No. So I in the Slack linked to an article by Jeet Heer for the New Republic, and the title of the article is "Why American Democracy is Broken and How to Fix It." And basically, the idea of the article is that I think it's like fairly conventional in the poli-science literature that that presidential systems are not particularly good or stable, and that parliamentary systems have been much more successful and have much better mechanisms for handling constitutional crises or even just a constitutional impasse. And so I think it is worth talking about.
Do they, though?
Well, I mean, isn't America the oldest democracy still in existence?
Still going for now?
No, that's like the Isle of Wight or something.
Oh, okay. So how about the largest democracy with more than like 400 people on it?
No, that's India.
No, that's still like the longest running democracy over the size of 400 people. Like,
okay. Okay, if you want to qualify it.
to exclude the fascinating Isle of Wight. If you want to demean the contributions to democratic society of the citizens of the Isle of Wight.
Yeah.
Dude,
then you be you.
Then you be you. Then you feel free. You feel free to trump it up and take a look at our allies and spit at them in the face, Tom.
Yeah.
Is the Isle of
Just a
Wight
regular
an
dump.
ally, by the way? Do we know? I think they are.
I mean, I don't know. I think everybody better get on side because we have all the nukes. So basically, the article says that it is Jeet Heer says that it's obvious that America isn't going to totally revamp its constitution and adopt a parliamentary system, but there are features of a parliamentary system that may be useful to America. So I think probably a way to talk about this is to first talk about what are the advantages of a parliamentary system, whether it's like a British Westminster style parliament or something that some other country uses, and then second, sort of what can America do better to take from that.
So what are the maybe it's worth explaining for a second. What is our system versus a parliamentary system? Like, let's not assume everybody knows what a parliamentary system is.
Okay, so in America, there's a president, and often the president is not an orange vulgarian, but as of the moment right now, that is the case.
I think we can say the vast majority of presidents have not been orange vulgarians.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like 44 of 45.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's right.
That's a pretty good batting average, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I think like and this is interesting. So I don't want to digress too much off the parliamentary discussion, but this is one of the things that I see in the media a lot, especially as recommendations to Democrats, because obviously they lost. So, we need to give them all kinds of recommendations. We are pundits after all. Yeah. And the recommendations are all based on this like sort of black swan event, right? And they're like, here's how we make this one particular event never happen again, which granted, it's pretty bad. It's been pretty bad. It's likely going to get worse. But, you probably can't like build a system or, make rules or decide how, you want to run your political operations based on this one last sort of terrible thing that just happened, And I think I wonder if that's part of the motivation of some of these discussions of a parliamentary system. But go ahead that was just my side.
Yeah, but I guess tell us what a parliamentary system is, AJ.
Yeah.
Now that we've talked about it for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
So
do we want to wait till AJ's asleep to talk about this, Tom? Per the rule we established in the Bitcoin episode?
Yeah.
So I think we all agree that in the United States, what you have is an executive branch that is very independent from the legislative branch, and that the legislative branch operates almost entirely independently of the executive, right? So aside from the requirement to submit to Congress a budget, so the president has to propose to Congress a budget every year
and
under the Constitution. And the presentment clause, where the president gets to veto bills. There's hardly any role for the president in the legislative process. And so that is.
Would we say that the vice president's role as president of the Senate is a presidential, executive role?
Say, yeah.
But even though the vice president presides over the Senate.
He has no power.
The vice president doesn't have power to speak during debates, offer motions. The vice president's only role is to break tie-breaking votes. I mean, there are a few other things, right? Like the vice president has the privilege of being the actual presiding officer, but I mean, the presiding officer in normal circumstances doesn't do very much, right? In like really extraordinary circumstances, the presiding officer might make some rulings on like parliamentary procedure or whether some
our audience would know more about this if we just read the Robert's Rules of Order to them.
So, but the point is that first of all, there are sort of two co-equal bicameral branches of the legislature, and there's a president that operates almost totally independently of the legislature. What it means is that when if an opposing political party controls one out of any of those three components of the government is very likely to stand at an impasse, as it has for the last 6 years. And indeed, even when a party controls both the House and the Senate and the presidency, small factions within the governing party can cause the entire country to grind to a halt.
Presumably that's by design, right?
I mean, I think it is.
It's like a design defect, not a manufacturing defect.
That's right. Yeah.
So the goal is sort of that these counter majoritarian measures would make it harder to pass legislation.
Yep.
Right? So the idea is that like simple majority votes, right? Because technically you could govern the country by plebiscite. You could just submit every decision to a popular vote.
Also known as California.
Yeah, and also known as Brexit.
Yeah.
But they decided not to do that, right? So the government is sort of intermediated by these elected representatives, and these elected representatives individually don't have very much influence because they have to work in these like large legislative bodies, and you have the House and the Senate are for the most part co-equal branches, so that if one is dominated by some party, then it if they're not both dominated by the same party, then it's very hard to get anything done, right? The goal is to make it harder for things to get done. And I think that, in the context of that goal, like the framers were very successful. They succeeded in having this extraordinarily counter-majoritarian government, right? That the shifting passions of the electorate aren't easily translated into policy. And that it has had, benefits when the electorate has wanted to do things that are bad. But it also is difficult when the electorate wants to do things that are good, right? So like the counter majoritarian makeup of our government has caused us to not have a public option healthcare system. We don't have cap and trade. We don't have DC is not the 51st state. I mean, there are all of these things that just, between say 2009 and 2011 that we could have achieved.
So, I mean, wouldn't Republicans say that is bad, though? Like, everything that you mentioned, that's like their worst nightmare.
Well, on the flip side, like, Republicans would have repealed the ACA by now if the country were less counter-majoritarian, right? Like, if the counter... Yeah. If the... Right? I mean, like, there are all sorts of other policy priorities that conservatives would probably like to give effect to that they've been unable to. So what's different about parliamentary countries? So countries that have parliaments include Israel, the United Kingdom, Germany, France, and has sort of a mixed presidential parliamentary system that is still sort of more parliamentary than presidential. But basically...
What about Canada?
What you have in these countries is that the prime minister, who is probably the person who has the most influence in setting policy for the country. And outside of mixed presidential parliamentary systems, the prime minister runs the executive branch as well. That person must come by design from the majority party in the legislature. And the result is that you have a system where it's much easier for majority parties to actually enact policy, right? So when you win an election, you actually get to enact your policies, and the people will see what it is you're trying to do or not to do. And if they like it, then you keep winning elections, and if they don't, then you don't, right? I mean, it's sort of for people to actually see the things that they voted for translated into actual policy, they can decide whether they like what they voted for or not. Whereas what we have here in the United States, because, tiny minorities are able to stymie the results of popular elections, people don't ever actually see the policies that they voted for enacted. I mean, I think it would be reasonable to say that it makes it much more difficult for people to be satisfied with their country overall. I mean, I don't know. Maybe you would disagree.
Yeah, I mean, I think and this is probably just a bias born of the fact that it has been this way, right? We haven't had a parliamentary system. So I think that our system works. It works pretty well, like there's lots of...
I don't think that's right.
So I think there's lots of shit that doesn't, obviously, like Congress doesn't pass as many laws, but I think that's not all necessarily bad, right? I think our system was built in many ways, and this may be the problem too, for you, I think, is that it was built to protect the status quo, whatever the status quo is. And it was built to require sort of a monumental approval from the people to change the status quo.
And I think a corollary to that, Ruchit, is not like protection of the status quo for the sake of the status quo.
Right.
But I think that the United States is very heterogeneous, right?
Right.
Like we are, I mean, a melting pot. We've got a lot of different people with a lot of different interests. And so, like, if at any time you have a majority that can impose its will on the entire country very fast, that can cause problems in a country that is as heterogeneous as us. AJ, can you think of a country that is close to or as heterogeneous as us that also has a parliamentary system?
Yeah, Canada.
I mean, I don't know if Canada is as is as
I don't. I just
quite as
all right.
diverse
Let's go
as
to
we are.
Let's go to Wiki. Let's go to the Wikipedia.
So while you're doing that, like, I think a lot of the issues or a lot of the approaches that the rest of the world has are not bad, and we should definitely consider them, and we shouldn't reject them outright. But I think a lot of things that work in heterogeneous countries or that work in homogeneous countries don't work in heterogeneous countries. And the heterogeneous nature of our country makes it difficult to implement those types of policies.
The United States is, according to Wikipedia, 77% white, 13% black, 5% Hispanic.
That seems wrong. We're way more than 5% Hispanic, dude.
Oh, sorry, 5% Asian. I misread. Oh, that's embarrassing. Okay. 77% white, 13% black, 5% Asian. By ethnicity, the 17% Hispanic Latino, 82% non-Hispanic Latino. By contrast, Canada is 76% European, 14% Asian, 4% Indigenous, 3% Black, 1.2% Latin American. So the United States and Canada have. I mean, these aren't like for like terms, right? It's like European versus white, et cetera, et cetera. But they I think it would be fair to say that they have a fairly similar demographic makeup. And I think that the metropolitan areas in Canada are much more diverse than the metropolitan areas in the United States. So, for example, Toronto, I think is
one of the most diverse cities
plurality white
in North America, for sure.
Right. Like Toronto is a plurality white, but not a majority white city. And so I think there's a fair point, right? I think there is some research that says that like heterogeneous societies are less likely to be able to have like robust safety nets because people are sort of much more generous in their policy preferences with respect to people from their own race. So, for example, one of the reasons why the Nordic countries have such robust have such robust public projects and welfare, et cetera, and social programs is that they're almost exclusively white countries, and so they don't have this sort of like racial resentment in their politics like they do in the United States, right? Like when you talk about welfare in the United States in certain corners of the country, it's almost explicit that you're talking about black people. Whereas in Nordic countries, they don't have black people to dog whistle or straw man in their politics. It's much easier for them to have robust social safety nets. So I think Rucha is making a point, but I'm not sure that point holds in discussing sort of what are the advantages and disadvantages that parliamentary systems have. So again, I think the first one is just that the coordination between the branches of government is guaranteed because it is built into the system, right? So because the executive comes from the majority party in the legislature, you don't have a problem like Obama did for most of his presidency, where at least part of the legislature was controlled by someone from the opposing party of the executive. I think the second thing that you would say is good about parliamentary,
but what about Trump? I mean, he's got complete control of the government, right? Like, and I think that goes to the amount of heterogeneity, I guess you could say, within parties themselves, right? So,
but Trump is like sui generis, right? Like, I don't think you would say that like, like Bush had narrower control of the Congress in his first 2 years in office, and in fact, in midway through the first,
right, he got tons of shit done.
He got a ton done, right? So I think that you would say that like Trump is unusual in that respect, right? That even slim majorities, when aligned with the executive, can be fairly productive. Trump is special in his inability to get anything through Congress, right? I mean, it mostly comes down to his own incompetence. It's not sort of. I don't think you would locate that phenomenon in some sort of in the structure of our political system, right? I mean, Bush lost the Senate in the middle of his first 2 years in office, right? Because the Senate was like 50-50. Dick Cheney was doing all these tiebreakers, and then there was a senator who crossed the aisle and became a Democrat, and suddenly for a couple of years of Bush's presidency, the Democrats had the Senate, and even so, Bush was extraordinarily effective, So I think that the fact that Trump is unable to achieve any sort of comprehensive legislative achievements 6 months into his presidency is purely a feature of Trump, a sui generis feature of Trump, and is not something that is reflective of our political system.
I think, yes, the political system is not getting very much done right now, but I guess I don't want them to do, just because, and maybe this just goes back to sort of my own biases, right? So I see Texas where, there is a supermajority of Republicans, and they are able to achieve a lot of policy outcomes that I and probably a whole lot of other people disagree with, And so let's say that was to reverse and Democrats were to sort of take power, right? I would want whatever change happens to be more gradual as well,
I think that's a fair point, right? I mean, that is a legitimate criticism of more majoritarian systems, like in most parliamentary systems, where even slim parliamentary majorities can achieve pretty drastic
And let me
change.
offer, I guess, another one, which is the difficulty that parliamentary systems have often in forming a government, right? And in keeping a government. So it's very common because, in order to make a government, if in a parliamentary system, especially if it's a multi-party, instead of a two-party, but a multi-party multi-party system, they have to hold a majority of the Congress, right? Of basically one chamber. And if they don't, which often there is no one party that does, there are coalitions that govern. And those coalitions, if somebody drops out of the coalition, that can cause a deadlock government. And you can have situations which you do all the time in Europe and Israel, in other countries where there are parliamentary systems, even in India, where you lose your parliamentary majority because like three people flip, and every 6 months you could basically have a new leader of the government. I mean, that's kind of I mean, I think that is a feature, right? So I think one of the problems that the United States has is that there are basically like two categories of situations that America is not equipped to deal with. And the first one I sort of call a constitutional crisis, and the second one I would call a constitutional impasse, right? So a constitutional crisis is when someone I mean, these are sort of the terms I use, but I would call a constitutional crisis a situation where someone is just flagrantly violating the Constitution. So, I mean, for example, let's say you've got like Bush and the illegal wiretapping, or Donald Trump and the emoluments clause, or something like that, right? Or Donald Trump and the Muslim ban, right? It was just a flagrant violation of the explicit terms of the Constitution. Hold on. I think a lot of these are probably not a constitutional crisis. I think the constitutional crisis, which we haven't had maybe ever, but definitely not in a while, is if the court were to make an order and then the president were to just flat out say, you know what, I'm not obeying that order.
Yeah. So I mean, right. So I think that is one form of constitutional crisis, right? The primacy of the courts, right? The court's ability to be the last word on how to interpret the laws in the Constitution, right? If the president were to just completely ignore that, like Andrew Jackson did during his presidency, that's a constitutional crisis. But I think that there are much smaller, there are much less drastic forms of crisis that can come up, right? Like I would say that the Muslim ban was a constitutional crisis, but it was one that our country's institutions were equipped to address, right? That in the end, the court system and sort of the public spirit overcame that crisis, right? But I think it is totally appropriate to say that what was happening in the United States in January where, the complete lack of guidance in rolling out the Muslim ban and the severity of the Muslim ban, some of the miscarriages of justice that occurred in January of 2017, I think it is totally appropriate to call a constitutional crisis. The second sort of category of things that I think the United States is not very well equipped to handle is a constitutional impasse. And that, I think, is when you have
define
branches
that.
of government.
What is a
Branches
constitutional
of government
impasse?
that, acting within their sort of constitutional powers, acting within the strict letter of the Constitution, still manage to stymie any sort of productivity or progress in the government. So the total blockade of the Merrick Garland nomination, right, I think was a drastic violation of our norms and I think it was sort of affront to the way a lot of Americans felt like our country ought to work. But a lot of how our country works is cultural or sort of implicit in.
I think this is a really important
how our
point.
country governs itself.
I think
right?
the point. So AJ, let me just, for our audience, emphasize this point that you're making, which is that a lot of what happens in countries and in institutions or in even in your work life, right, is purely based on norms. It's not based on a rule book, It's not based on you receiving training on you can do this or you cannot do this, right? It is based on habit, and it's based on everybody sort of implicitly or explicitly agreeing, hey, this is just the way our system works, And this is the concept of the rules matter more than winning, right? And that was like how Brent Scrowcroft, who was like during the Iraq War, I always remember this, during the second Iraq War, I guess, the one in 2003, he said that, we'll never succeed in Iraq. And the reason is because you can't teach people overnight that the rules matter more than winning, because that's what democracy is.
That's a good point.
The rules matter more than winning.
I don't know. I don't know if I would put it in terms of like, the U.S. can or can't like bring civilization to the savages or whatever, because I think there's
sure.
I think that specific episode is tied up in a lot of other problems. But I think that little element, right, the idea that it is very difficult to describe to people how much of the way your life functions and the way your country government functions and your workplace functions,
you can't impose the concept.
Is just based on how the implicit agreements that we have with how to treat to each other. I mean, in some ways, like you wouldn't even be able to write them down, right? Like you can't write down like the comedy of the Senate, for example, right? Like, like this is the great deliberative body and things like that. The way that sort of John McCain feels when he lives inside his own asshole about how the Senate ought to work.
Gosh,
right?
John McCain, American hero.
Like I think there's no way to like write that down.
American hero.
So
I'm doing this partly because I believe it's true, but also partly to annoy the hell out of AJ.
Okay,
we just splice in clips of you hating on John McCain in the last few episodes.
I mean, listen, he redeemed himself.
Every time there's like a debt ceiling crisis or a government shutdown because you can't pass a budget, each of the individual members of the government are totally acting within the strict letter of the Constitution. They're exercising duly granted constitutional powers to vote for or against legislation or to hear or not hear nominees, whatever the case may be, right? But nevertheless, you have a breakdown in the function of the government, right? You have the government functioning in a way where people would recognize is not good, is not the right way to run a country. And so our country overall doesn't have a lot of institutions or mechanisms that help deal with constitutional crises and constitutional impasses. A parliamentary system is much more flexible, right? So, for example, if a vote with the sort of importance that the healthcare vote were to go the way it did in the United States, in almost any other country, Mitch McConnell would resign and there'd probably be a new election. And people could go to the polls and decide
that's a good point.
How to refocus the country, right? Like
that's a good point.
The ability to call snap elections and the turnover that you have in people resigning the government or losing their coalitions, et cetera, is sort of an escape valve, right? It is a way to have, it is a way to reset the government if all else fails, you can have a snap election, or you can have your coalitions rejigger, or whatever it is that you need to do to cause the government to move forward. And you don't have a situation like we did in the United States in 2016, where everyone, the election was November. There's no way to have it sooner than November. And we just weren't going to find out who would get to name another Supreme Court justice until November. If it were really that urgent in other countries, you could have a snap election. So, I think that the lack of stability you have in coalitions and the fact that they can tend towards extremism because, narrow coalitions are beholden to the vote that gives you a majority, right? Like if you, as we saw in the Senate, right, that the fringes of your coalition can dominate your coalition, right? So the Senate only has 52 votes. That means you can only ever lose 3 senators. And that means the 3 most conservative Republican senators and the 3 most liberal senators, in a way, have a veto over the policy preferences of the other 46 senators, right? So you've got your 46... The 46 senators in the middle. You've got your 3 most liberal and your 3 most conservative Republicans, and those 6 senators on the fringes have a lot of influence in your government because you have such a narrow majority, such a narrow coalition, right? And an escape valve, instead of just sitting there having your government being run by the 3 most conservative members of your government, you can just have another election. If it's not working, just try again. So I think that is a serious benefit of a parliamentary system.
I mean, so a lot of the goals that we're trying to achieve here could be achieved by the concept of shame.
Right, but shame is a norm, right? Like shame is a norm in our country. You can't write shame into your constitution.
No, I would argue that shame is not a norm in our country. At least in politics, it's not a norm in politics, is what I would say. And if everybody had their Indian mother like Tom and I do, you know what I mean? That would make sure that that you would feel the appropriate shame when you needed to. You would, but I do wonder, how can we establish these? Is there a way to establish new norms in a country? What do you think about it? What do you guys think about that?
I think we have a new norm now. I think that you will find in our country that the only way to appoint a Supreme Court justice is when the president and the Senate are controlled by the same party. From now on, I mean, we'll lose 2, 3, 4 justices at a time. We'll go down to a 4 or 5 member court until you can get an alignment of the presidency and the Senate. That's a new norm in our country.
How about a new positive norm? How do we make new positive norms? That's really where my question was going, AJ.
Well, Tom, what do you think?
I don't think there is anything positive left in this country.
Dude, Tom, stop being such a dude. Tom, you're such a.
Can you imagine Tom running for office and someone going through the archives of everything we know about the American heartland?
Yeah, it'll probably be consistent. He'll probably be like, I said then, as I say now, there is nothing positive.
There is nothing positive in our country.
We've been living with Donald Trump as president for the last 20 years.
And all I'm saying is that instead of giving the presidency to little Barron, who's now 33,
still a young boy,
I just suggest maybe we give it to Ivanka instead. I didn't think this would be so controversial. Wait, who is that following me?
Yeah.
I don't know, man. I think we do have to figure out sort of how to create positive norms, And we did actually, right? I think there was a period of 30 years, kind of during the civil rights movement and then after the civil rights movement, where we created a series of positive new norms. Until recently, you couldn't just be a complete racist,
like what,
and get elected to office.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
I mean, until very, very recently, you couldn't do that. Oh, I've got another one. Until very recently, you couldn't physically assault a reporter and get elected to office.
But Rucha, do you think that, so using your civil rights analogy, do you think that has a lot to do with the passage of that omnibus or multiple large civil rights bills that sort of changed the landscape?
No, I don't think so, actually. I think that was sort of the culmination, but it was actually the I would say, sort of decade of kind of protest and struggle that began the process of changing people's minds. And then the law changed, which also sort of changed people's minds, or at least it changed their behaviors. And then those behaviors just became part of society, right? As the next generation saw, well, you can't do this, it's illegal. Soon what became illegal also became immoral, I don't know which way. I think it started with a moral argument. In the middle was a legal argument, and then the kind of what kept it that way really was a moral argument as well. So I don't think it was like I definitely don't think it began with the passage of the Civil Rights Act, the creation of those norms. I mean, what were you going to say, AJ? Sorry, dude.
No. I was just saying that I think that part of how I guess like the reason why people now think that you shouldn't be racist in public, right? That you can sort of link that to the civil rights movement, but also the point to be made there is that the reason why the civil rights movement was successful is that young people supported it, right? That the generation coming up tended to be much more liberal, and that's how you end up with. I mean, you see what I'm saying?
No, I do. It was the,
but like it's sort of you wouldn't say that like. It's hard to explain which one caused the other, right?
Yeah.
But wouldn't you agree that the generation coming up now it tends to be a lot more liberal than conservative?
Yeah, I would.
Yeah.
Millennials and such?
Yeah, and I think America's getting much more liberal every day.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that too. So, I mean, maybe at least in terms of, social liberal values, we don't need to worry that much.
I think something that we should all always keep in mind is that the Republican congressional majority is comprised of an extraordinarily slim majority of the popular vote for Congress. And Donald Trump only won about 46% of the popular vote for the presidency, and in fact was 2 or 3 million votes behind Hillary Clinton in the popular vote. Like this government that has control of all of the levers of power, that they control the Supreme Court, the Congress, and the presidency. This is not a government that is based on any sort of like sweeping majority of the popular vote, right? That I don't think you would say that the sentiment of most Americans resides with the Republican Party, despite the Republicans' control of all of the levers of power in the country.
Yeah, I think that's something that like we have to really like constantly remember and remind ourselves and everyone else, right? Because I think it's very easy to get conned into the idea that this is just what America is now. America just is racist, or America just is like unkind to immigrants. This is just what America is now. Like you can't do anything about it, and I think we have to like really reject the idea that that's what America is, for all the reasons you kind of said. Yeah.
So what does Jeet Heer think? Jeet doesn't think that we're going to actually have a Westminster Parliament in our country anytime soon. So what does he think we can do? He says that one of the things that would be really beneficial is having less power in the presidency, right? So if one of the flaws
that's working
in our country well, no, I mean that actually is working, right? Like the signature legislative achievement of the 2017 term in Congress is the weakening the president's power to reduce sanctions, right?
Yeah.
And that President Trump has indicated that he's planning to sign this new sanctions bill, and what the sanction bill said, whereas before the president could just reduce sanctions on Russia under his own authority. Now Congress said, well, hold on. If you're going to reduce the sanctions on Russia, you have to give us notice, and we've got time to disapprove of the change in policy, right? And that taking back of power from the executive is to a certain extent,
I think that's progress, honestly. I think that's progress. I think the presidency had way too much power and had really been gaining power since at least Reagan. There was like a lull there with Nixon, right? Because remember, like after Nixon left office, Congress really reasserted itself in a lot of different ways. For example, it passed the War Powers Act, which in many ways sort of limited the president's ability to just sort of willy-nilly like bomb shit for fun.
It passed the Freedom of Information Act.
Yeah, that's another one that I had forgotten about.
Ford opposed it.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, Ford sent Antonin Scalia out. Antonin Scalia was in Ford's like Office of Legal Counsel, I think.
Oh wow!
And he sent Antonin Scalia out to testify in front of Congress in opposition to the Freedom of Information Act.
Yeah,
because it was an invasion of the president's executive prerogatives.
Right, to have to release all of this information. Wow, I didn't know that was a. I guess I didn't know when the Freedom of Information Act was passed, but
yeah,
I think this sort of reducing the power of the presidency is probably net a very good thing. Maybe it moves us more towards sort of a parliamentary system as well, you know, without maybe sort of the need to like have elections every 6 months. I don't know. I mean, like, I guess I haven't looked at the data in terms of participation, but I feel like if I had to go vote like every 6 months, I would get like really tired of it. Like I'd be like, again, come on. And I mean, actually, we all are supposed to go vote every 6 months. It's just that nobody votes in all of the random municipal elections and bond elections and God knows what else, you know? We're like,
primaries.
Yeah, exactly. We're like 4% turnout decides like the future of, you know, how much debt the city takes on and things like that, you know?
I always vote for every city bond package. It doesn't matter how much debt the city wants to take.
You're the worst, dude.
I don't think I'm the worst.
Dude, I mean, maybe not the worst. I mean, I think we can all agree that whenever someone calls someone the worst, they mean the worst, excepting people like Donald Trump, right? Because, like, this, like, if we were to hold the term the worst a little too literally, it would just be hard to call anybody the worst, you know?
Isn't that the point?
No, I don't know, dude. It would really limit our abilities to use hyperbole. I mean, I'm willing to give the parliamentary system a try, AJ.
That's very generous.
Yeah. I mean, maybe what we could do is like we can just register to vote in other countries that don't have voter fraud commissions. You know what I mean? And
so, okay. So what else does Jeet Heer say? He says that something else that would rebalance the level of power between Congress and the presidency is restoring congressional staffing. So when Newt Gingrich was Speaker of the House in the 1990s, he slashed the budgets for congressional staffs, and he slashed the budgets that committees had for hiring staffers, and it led to a huge brain drain in Congress, right? That now you have a situation where all of these members of Congress don't have the money to hire staffers who actually can provide useful information in policymaking, and it's caused a huge amount of dependency on think tanks and lobby groups to lend their expertise to legislators because they just genuinely don't have the budget or manpower to grapple with really complex issues. So AT&T has to like parachute in their lobbyists to explain like how wires and poles work. You know?
So I've seen this, like, I mean, in the Texas legislature, I've seen this, right, is that the staff is very good, but experienced staff leaves very quickly to go become lobbyists, right? And, I mean, I knew a lady that, you know, she was being heavily recruited by the industry groups that lobbied her. And the reason was because she was saving the state like literally $3 or $4 billion a year. Okay. Like, so every year they would offer her like $1 million+ to leave. Okay. And come work for them because it makes a lot of sense, right? Like, she knows where the bodies are buried. She understands all the intricacies of legislation in this policy area. And it's a policy area that really matters for state budget purposes and obviously matters for that regulated industry. And, you know, eventually she left, right? And she left to go make probably 10 to 15 times more money than she would ever make in state government. And, you know, if she could make like 2 times more, 2.5 times more than she was making, she probably never would have left. But I can tell you that like the state budget with her gone probably loses like $2 or $3 billion a year consistently. So, you know, you can just, there is a return on investment that you get. And I'm biased in this since I was once a legislative staffer, that you get from really high quality legislative staff that it's hard for the government to get from anything else. And that's why those people get hired as lobbyists, right? Is because if you can protect some valuable tax incentive that saves your industry $3 billion a year, and you can spend $3 or $4 million lobbying to save $2 or $3 billion a year, like that's a great return on investment, right? Like there's no factory you can build that's going to give you that type of return on investment, right? Like short of investing in Amazon, like when it was founded, there's really nothing you can do to get such a high return on lobbying. I mean, the return on investment that you get from lobbying is just way too high. It's way too high.
I think that's right. And I think the point that Jeet here is making is that if you were to curtail the power of the presidency and if you were to restore congressional staffing, that the Speaker of the House would become, or the Senate Majority Leader would become much more like a prime minister. I mean, particularly in the French model. So in the French model, you do have a president that's sort of more like an American style president, and the president does appoint the prime minister. But once the prime minister is appointed and confirmed, the prime minister runs the policy making efforts of the legislature, right? The prime minister becomes much more like, is sort of like the speaker of the is like the Speaker of the House, but like has much more institutional power within the government. So, I don't know. I think there's like a good point here, right? That that having more of the power concentrated in the legislature means that the legislature acts much more as a member of the, like wherever the majority is in the legislature, sort of leads to, it leads to fewer impasses, right? That the majority is wherever the majority of the legislature is necessarily is where the power is concentrated.
There may also be another ancillary benefit, right? Which is that the legislature may actually care more about how the government functions or doesn't function, right? Because right now the job of the legislature is really to pass the laws. And yeah, it's to oversee agencies, but they don't really have any control over agencies, and they don't really, I mean, they're doing work, don't get me wrong, obviously. The Congress is doing work to oversee different agencies, but they don't really have any influence per se, And what that's doing is making it so that the competence of the executive function of government is fully reliant on the executive, branch. And maybe that's bad, especially when you have an incompetent executive branch.
Yeah. I think that's exactly right.
I think Tom is asleep.
Yeah.
So Tom, what do you think?
I mean, I just don't see that these two reforms that you suggest are going to bring on that many more advantages of a parliamentary system. Like, I think the parliamentary system's primary advantages are the ability to quickly turn over bodies of the legislature, right? Like, I think isn't that the driving force behind movement of bills and basically action in the parliaments?
Yeah, I think in a manner of speaking, that's true.
So, like, without that, would these reforms really? I mean, I guess these reforms might make Congress a little bit more efficient. But other than that, what would they really do?
Well, I think that beefing up legislative staff could probably make the government a lot less corrupt, right? Or a lot less sort of
a lot
impervious
so
to
like,
corruption, I guess.
So my point is that these may be good reforms in and of itself for other reasons, but I don't think these reforms sound in the type of like advancing the ball towards a parliamentary system reforms, or you know what I mean? They're not of the parliamentary reform type.
Yeah, I mean, I think the point is that what are the things we could do within our Constitution to reduce the incidence of these intractable impasses, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one of them,
but I don't know if it. So like beefing up the legislative staff and weakening the president, I don't know if that would create any change to prevent constitutional impasses, as you would call them, for example.
Yeah, that's true. I don't think they would do anything for constitutional impasses, but they'd make our government run a lot better, probably.
Yeah, no,
which is worth something.
these are like, I mean, yes, I agree with you there that these reforms can be debated on their merits in terms of, okay, are they going to make the government efficient, right? And like there could be a whole slew of reforms that make the government more efficient or less efficient or whatever, right? But my point is that, I don't think these reforms really do anything. So remember the two advantages or two problems that AJ started this conversation out with was, one, constitutional crises, as he defined them, being those flagrant violations of the Constitution that I guess go unchecked, and two, the constitutional impasses, right? So with regard to one, who is checking the executive, for example? Weakening the power of the executive might allow them not to do some of the things that they would otherwise do, right? But for example, with the emoluments clause, right? Like, unless Congress steps in and impeaches Trump, there's really no recourse like a private citizen has for Trump, violating the Constitution or having these constitutional crises, right? And the second thing is the constitutional impasse, where Congress basically gets nothing done. Well, if you have a system like ours where you have the ability of the minority to grind things to a halt, then making Congress offices, congressmen's and women's offices more competent doesn't do anything to prevent that or stop that impasse.
I think that's mostly right, but I think the point that Jeet Heer is making is mostly that one of the features of a parliamentary system that we would probably agree is positive, right, is that the party that has control of the legislature has control of the government. It's sort of much there is much less opportunity for an impasse, right? And so obviously we can't just say that the president and Congress have to be from the same party or we'll call a new election. So what can we do within the constitutional structure? And one of the things is if it's a benefit that there is more power concentrated in that there is more incidents of agreement between the executive and the legislature when they both come from the same party, then we already know what party Congress is because it exists, right? So whatever party happens to be in control of Congress, the more power Congress has, the less opportunity there is for an impasse between the presidency and Congress, right? So by having more staff be provided to Congress is less dependent on things like the Office of Management and Budget, which for in different administrations, like particularly in the Nixon administration, was like hyper partisan. And I think you're finding in the Trump administration that the Office of Management and Budget is hyper partisan. And one of the reasons why the Congressional Budget Office was created was for Congress to have their own Office of Management and Budget that they could rely on that wasn't hyper partisan. For in service of the president, right? And so I think we've already instituted reforms similar to what Jeet Heer is calling for. But I think the 1990s, I think the liberalization of the 1990s and 2000s have been a real disservice to our democracy, right? That, something like the Congressional Budget Office that we think of as a positive development in the vein of what Jeet Heer is calling for has been reversed by Newt Gingrich and is further eroding. And you sort of like it when your guy's president, like when Obama was more active in issuing executive orders in order to enact policy change. I think sort of liberals were happier with that. And I think in the short term perspective, yeah, that's good. But what Jeet Heer is saying is that, it is not conducive to the long-term operation of the government to have the presidency be so powerful because of the opportunity for the presidency to clash with Congress.
I'm in favor of presidential clashes with Congress. Mm-hmm. I am.
I'm sort of not.
I am. Like I think that it makes sure that when we do want to change things, like, it really isn't something that we can do willy-nilly. Because I think, like, there have been lots of presidents, for better or for worse, that I'm sure would have loved to have do things willy-nilly, without really any regard. I'm glad that it was I'm glad it was hard, I'm glad it's been hard.
So I think that part of the reason why the Republican healthcare bill was so screwed up was because they were trying to use reconciliation, right? So the reconciliation process has really strict limitations on the budgetary effects of reconciliation bills. So reconciliation bills, all of the provisions in reconciliation bills have to be mostly about the spending of the government. They can't be about policy. The policy provisions in a reconciliation bill have to be incidental to the spending measures or the budgetary measures that they're attached to. So, what you end up with is these bills that are like totally tortured, right? So why did the Bush tax cuts expire right at the end of 10 years? Because then they could be passed through reconciliation, right? Because in a 10-year window, they didn't have an impact on the budget deficit. So you end up with these like really tortured policy formulation directly as a result of the counter-majoritarian measures in our government, right? So because we have this 60 vote threshold to defeat filibusters, what you end up with is, we've got these slim majorities in Congress and we're going to have to pass whatever bills we can get passed that we can pass without the 60 vote threshold applying. So whatever we can do through reconciliation, we will. And so you still end up with tremendously crappy policy. It's not like the majority is not going to vote for anything at all, right? Like, I mean, what happened with the healthcare bill was unusual in the scheme of things. I think we're ending up with worse policy, more tortured legislation, and we're not getting as much done. So people feel less connected to their government. They feel like elections don't have consequences because it doesn't matter who they elect. Nothing can get through Congress. On the other hand, liberals feel like, well, hold on, didn't we win the presidency twice in a row? How come we don't get to appoint Supreme Court justices, right? I mean, I think that the way that people feel that their government ought to function is much more similar to a parliamentary system than what we have now. That I think is sort of the chief takeaway from this Jeet Heer article. Maybe we've talked about it for like an hour longer than we should have.
Man, this guy better like retweet our podcast. Like this Jeet Heer dude who
who is Jeet Heer?
Yeah, who is this
guy?
Editor.
He's an editor at New Republic. He's really good.
Is he
I
Canadian?
Like him a lot.
You're always linking to his stuff.
I think
that's the only reason I know him.
Yeah,
I think he lives in Toronto.
I assumed all you Canadians knew each other.
Yeah, there's like a weekly Skype. We all Skype each other all the time.
I knew it.
If only you were a member of the family of the Isle of Wight, AJ.
So, okay, what else do you want to talk about?
The Isle of Wight sounds like a board game.
It really does.
No, wait, I'm thinking of the Isle of Skye.
I've never heard of that either. I'll be right back, guys.
Have you played it, AJ?
Or is it the Isle of Man? It's the Isle of Man that's the longest continuing government, not Wight. I think I
Have you played
up.
Isle of Skye, AJ?
No, is it fun?
I've heard it's fun. Hold on. No, the Isle of Skye is an island in board. Let me see here. Yeah, Isle of Skye. It's a board game. Where did Richard go?
What did Richard do?
I don't know.
What do you want to talk about when he gets back?
I don't know. Maybe how bad John McCain is.
I hate John McCain.
Like, I guess, on the John McCain front, I suppose we need to offer him credit in the sense that he was not willing to uninsure 32 or 30 whatever million people. He was only willing to uninsure like 16 or 17.
No, it's the opposite. He voted for BICRA, which would uninsure 23 million people. He just didn't vote for skinny repeal, which would only uninsure 15 million people.
No. I thought it was the opposite. He didn't vote for outright repeal, right?
No.
Are we talking about America's biggest hero?
Yeah.
No, okay. Tom, there's repeal. Here, let's do this very quickly. So there's repeal and delay, which John McCain didn't vote for. Repeal and delay would uninsure about 32 million people.
Yes.
There's BICRA, which would uninsure about 23 million people, which John McCain did vote for. John McCain voted in favor of BICRA, right? And then finally, there's skinny repeal, which would uninsure about 15 million people.
Okay. So it's very strange, I guess, but I maybe he deserves credit for not being willing to uninsure 32 million people, but only 23 million people, right? Like that's a level of moderation in our new world, new norm society that we need to now live with.
I mean, yeah, I guess so,
dude.
Right?
I think like you guys need. I mean, this is a great outcome. You guys should be happy. Like, why is John McCain getting even like 5 seconds of criticism?
He voted for BICRA.
Yeah. He wanted to uninsure 23 million people.
Dude, he helped create the outcome that you are now happy about.
He voted for Bikra.
I mean, this is all...
After giving a speech about how he didn't plan to vote for Bikra.
I'm still confused as to
So,
still confused about this.
Ruchit, what is good about wanting to uninsure? What is good about being a person that wants to uninsure 23 million people?
Tom, what is bad about being the tie-breaking vote that made sure that millions of people didn't lose their health insurance?
What was bad about being the tie-breaking vote that let them proceed on to vote about taking away all that health insurance?
Actually, that was Ron Johnson, to be fair.
No, I mean, it passed 51-50, so everyone was the tie-breaking vote.
No. Ron Johnson was the last vote, so he was the tie-breaking vote.
No, he wasn't.
No, he was.
He wasn't, because
he waited.
all the Republicans...
He waited.
No.
Ron Johnson waited to see how McCain voted. I mean, this is actually goes to Ron Johnson's lack of courage.
But McCain wasn't the last person to vote either. So you can't be right, because the Democrats voted. Yeah, there was some Democrat that was the last vote by your logic.
Was there? Are you sure?
Yeah. Yes, the Democrats all waited until.
Do you think John McCain was the 100th vote?
Yeah, the Democrats all waited until after the Republicans had voted to vote.
Well, in any event, McCain was the tie-breaking vote.
Rouge. Good Rouge.
Okay. I my point, I think, was that he deserves some credit, but not the level of credit that Ruchit is spewing upon him.
Here's the deal. John McCain voted on the motion to proceed. He voted against referring it to committee, even though he kept calling for regular order. Twice he voted against referring it to the committee. He voted against referring it to the Help Committee. He voted against referring it to the Finance Committee. He voted against repeal and delay, which would have uninsured 32 million people. And he voted against skinny repeal, which would have uninsured 16 million people. But he did vote for Bikra, which would have uninsured 23 million people. John McCain is not some principled hero in defense of Medicaid. He is someone who has a very Goldilocks sense of what is the appropriate number of people to uninsure, and it was more than 16 and fewer than 32.
Yeah. It's very, I can't make any sort of principled, argument as to why he did these things. It just doesn't make any sense. If you're, if you're one of the senators who are, on the moderate side of things, at least, their votes were principled.
I think Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski were principled. I don't really think John McCain was.
That's what
there
I
was
mean.
Someone, I can't remember who it was. There was someone on Twitter who said that if you have a reputation as a maverick, sometimes that reputation requires a little bit of burnishing. And I think John McCain has a keen sense of what plays on television and has a keen sense of drama. But that's sort of glib, you'll just have, when he was walking into the Senate and they said, how are you going to vote? And he said, you'll just have to wait and see the show. That glib sense of the spectacle of his own self-aggrandizement, I think is more quintessentially describes John McCain than any sort of fawning, feelings that Ruchit may have.
Mm-hmm.
Dude,
did Ruchit leave again?
No, dude, I'm here. I'm just waiting for you guys to finish so I can have the last word. Dude, he's an American hero. Dude. He's an American hero.
Before you have your last word, can I just point out that AJ edits the episodes and I do the show notes?
Dude, there will be some recording.
So go ahead. Have your last word, Ruchit.
You're gonna have to start participating a lot more in the production if you think you're actually gonna have the last word.
Have your last word, Ruchit.
Dude, I'm just saying.
See how that works out for you.
No, dude, John McCain's hero, okay, and he made sure that the outcome that we all wanted in this situation occurred. And frankly, everyone should be happy about it. And just because he didn't do everything the way you would have liked is the classic sort of leftist approach, which is he's not perfect, so I can't praise him at all, which is wrong. It's wrong.
Literally, I just said he deserves some credit, but not the level of credit that Ruchit, spews on him.
Not AJ. AJ's willing to give him zero credit.
No, I think he deserves some credit.
I think my understanding of AJ's criticism is that this was all theater for John McCain, and he shouldn't be making theater out of the lives of millions of people. And I think that's a fair criticism, right?
Well, and I think the other thing that I was saying is that a lot of what John McCain did over the course of the healthcare debate was in poor faith. That what he did was either he really does think that 20 million people is the appropriate number to uninsure and 16 is not enough and 32 is too many, or he has a very keen sense of self-aggrandizement that this whole episode was designed to burnish his reputation as a maverick. But either way, whatever Richard is about to say next, I'm marking this as an edit point, and I'm going to edit it out, and then we're going to move on to sidebar.
Oh my God, dude. Oh my God.
Man, Rich, there's nothing stopping you from taking the reins of editing each of these episodes and doing all the show notes.
Dude, no. That's not
nothing stopping you.
That's not my point. My point actually has nothing to do with that. My point is that
Okay, sidebar?
Okay. Sure.
Tom, what do you got?
Well, let me go to the show notes. Oh yeah. So, have you guys heard of Venmo?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
So Venmo is this service that allows you to easily and frictionlessly give money to your friends. Basically, like it's an app. You say, I want to give Ruch at $15 for buying me dinner, and immediately the money goes to Ruch, right? There's this website called Vicemo, which basically tracks exchanges, because Venmo is a social network that allows your friends to see or the public to see what you're paying for. Vicemo tracks when people give money for drugs, weed, strippers.
Oh my God.
Drugs.
Elise paid Shay for strippers.
Yeah.
What happens when you click on it?
I don't know. If Elise is listening, could she write in and let us know why she paid Shay for strippers? I would like to know.
Wait. Kevin paid Lily for grass-fed, artisan, gluten-free, vegan ground beef. You think that's drugs?
Was this Lily Hausman / Smullen?
No. Oh,
Different
shit.
Lily?
It's on.
What's going on?
Hold on, I'm going to answer this. Hey, what's up?
Ruch, you still there?
yeah, dude, is this a prank call of some kind that's going on?
I don't know. I mean, maybe it is Elise.
Yeah, maybe it's Elise calling to find out what's going on with her drugs.
She's calling to tell us why she paid Shay.
I'm so confused by all of these things.
Are you looking at Vicemo.com?
No.
Go to Vicemo.com.
I thought it was illegal, dude. I don't want to be going to any of this illegal sites.
No, it's not illegal. It just tracks when people are buying drugs,
Oh my God.
booze, and sex on Venmo.
Oh my God. This is insane.
What's insane?
Well, I mean, people are probably joking about these things, right?
Yeah, I think there's a significant portion of the people on Venmo who pay for rent, saying it's for male strippers.
Also, there's grass cutting. That's coming up.
Yeah, I think grass is just one of the keywords, right?
Yeah, grass is a keyword.
Madeline paid Kyle for edibles. Okay, I'm gonna
lot of stripper payments.
Samuel paid Nathan for strippers and Mexican Bam Bam.
What does that even mean?
Do you guys know what Mexican Bam Bam is?
Definitely Googleable.
Is that a crime? Does Donald Trump know about this?
It's probably something he did in Russia.
He's probably on the P tape. Okay, so mine is Yo Gabba Gabba, which I think is the greatest ever children's show ever created. This is a show that we introduced Jonah to this weekend, and he loves it, and it's a new favorite show. The premise of the show is that they have actual real famous recording artists record children's songs. So here's one of my favorite songs from the show. I linked it on YouTube.
Is it like when Snoop Dogg did that children's book? He rapped that children's book.
Wait, go to this YouTube. This song's really good.
Yeah, I'm going, but I have it on mute so I can hear you guys.
So we've been watching this show with Jonah, and he likes it just because it's a kid's show and it's sort of everything that happens very quickly. But I like it because there's music in it that I actually really enjoy. So Mark Mothersbaugh does a lot of the music. Devo does an episode. The Shins do an episode. The Reets do a couple episodes. Actual cut copy of Montreal. Actual recording artists that you would be excited to see. Would be excited to see on television, do these kids songs. And it's actually just, I don't know, I think it's one of those kid shows that is sort of very fun for adults and children to watch together. And I actually think that if you're an adult, you may just want to watch it also. I just clicked on The Roots. The Roots perform a song called Lovely Love My Family.
I just added a URL into the show notes. Click on that.
What is it? I'm going to click on this. So Ludacris is rapping a Or Ludacris is rapping a children's book called Llama Llama Red Pajama.
That was pretty good.
We should get Ludacris on the show, Yo Gabba Gabba. He can sing Yo Llama Llama.
No, like for real, I think people should check out Yo Gabba Gabba. I think it's a good show that is actually just fun to watch if you just like to see things that are nice.
So my sidebar is probably way too related to the show, but I'm going to do it anyway. It's Prime Minister's Questions, which is my biggest argument for why we should have a parliamentary system, which is
Prime Minister's Questions.
So in the UK, it's either every week or every 2 weeks.
And in Canada.
Oh, really? I didn't know in Canada as well. Every 2 weeks, the Prime Minister is required to go to the House of Commons, so to the equivalent of the House of Representatives, if you will, and actually answer questions. And so you will just see people like trolling the Prime Minister. Like people from the opposing party just making all kinds of ridiculous like comments and snide remarks and asking these questions. And, that's how you sort of make your name, is if you're somebody that can like really just mess with the Prime Minister during Prime Minister's Questions. So I think it's a great thing. And,
they have this in Russia too.
Oh, really? Putin goes and answers people's questions?
Yeah, so he does a marathon question and answer TV show where he just sits on TV and answers people's questions.
Dude, that's pretty baller.
I'll link to it.
That's I wonder if that helps him like keep his power, because it has this like facade of like people are like, oh yeah, he'll answer our questions.
This is cool. Yeah, everybody should check out some Prime Minister Questions. People are like really aggressive.
Yeah.
Oh my God. The speaker just said that the representative from Stratford upon Avon is just gesticulating in a distinctly eccentric manner, and he should stop doing so. Shakespeare's County deserves better. This is nuts.
I just love how they like. I should actually find like YouTube of like sort of the best Prime Minister's questions, because some of the ones with David Cameron actually were really, really funny.
Rooch, you should compile it and we can put it in the show notes.
Okay, I will.
And then that would be like a treat for the listeners.
Why is Jeremy Corbyn is shouting? Jeremy Corbyn's doing such good shouting. They're just shouting at each other.